Perfect. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. I think this is going to be a really good session. We've got a few people just on their way into the call, and they're going to pop in over the next couple of minutes. It should be sort of be a group of familiar faces for people sort of from past your life, but also through the Scottish Agroecology Partnership. So we're going to try and make this fairly informal, quite open Q&A sort of style presentation. Just some bit more information on Scottish Agroecology Partnership. So it's a collaboration of 8 organisations, which are kind of rapidly becoming a voice for agroecology in Scotland, and the aim is to make sort of agroecology more central to farming, crofting, and growing in Scotland. The formal partnership's made up of Soil Association Scotland, Landworks Alliance, Food Farming Countryside Commission, NFFN, Pasture for Life, and a couple of other organisations you'll be familiar with. The project that we're running is the key objective is to increase farmers, crofters, and growers' understanding of agroecological and organic practices and their confidence to implement them. We're basically building on feedback from previous programs that these organisations will run, trying to meet demand for content, improving farm resilience, soil health, biodiversity, and progress towards a net zero. So these sort of peer-to-peer knowledge exchange sessions and events are all sort of linked towards that. We're being funded this year again by the Scottish Government Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund. So massive thanks to the Scottish Government for funding us as a group, but also individually through other projects. Just before I hand over to Jock Gibson, who's going to start us off, just some sort of housekeeping for today. If you have any questions at all, please just stick them in the chat function or pop your hand up if you're able to do so. We'll sort of take questions intermittently throughout the session and try and make it as kind of interactive for you as possible. If you're happy to just keep your mics off during the presentation, unless asked otherwise, but please feel free to keep your cameras on so we can see some smiling faces as we go. This meeting is being recorded and we'll share it at the end of today. And a big ask from me is that if you have to leave early, please complete the feedback form that will come around in the follow-up email. That feedback form will also be shared just as we're wrapping up the end of the session. So without anything else, I'm just going to pass over to you, Jock. Take it away.
Awesome afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's well. I'm going to apologise in advance because I am not as well organised for this as I would have liked to have been. I've had a fairly hellish couple of weeks, and so I'm just trying to catch up with myself. Yeah, what I'm going to do today is just give you a bit of background about what we do here. I'm going to talk a little bit about my Nuffield studies, which links into that. And then if we've got time and everyone's still awake, then we might talk a bit about Farmstrong as well. But as we go along, just as it's a small group of us, just fire in questions and we can talk about it as we go. So that'll be grand. My name's Jock. We farm up in Dallas in Moray. I was a building services engineer to trade before coming back to the butcher shop initially. I decided I wasn't particularly good at building services and didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed the sustainability side of it, but the actual detail left me cold. So I came back to our butcher shop in about 2007. And then in 2015, my wife and I took on our family farm. So my wife is the very long-suffering Fiona. We have 3 kids as well. Ayla, who's 13, Tilly, 11, and Rory's 8. And every time I update this slide, it scares me how much I have to change the ages in the kids. Yeah. And Rory is certainly a little bit bigger than what is shown in that picture. So Edenvale Farm, I sort of describe myself as a 1.5 generation farmer on the basis that my parents weren't around for long enough and I wasn't paying any attention when they were alive. So we're sort of stuck between the two. We farm about 250 head of cattle on the farm. Farm was initially bought in the mid 70s by my father and grandparents, and it started off with Highland cattle. They they Dad went on to export Highland genetics all around the world. At one point in Scandinavia, you couldn't get a Highland cow that wasn't in some way linked back to our fold here. And funnily enough, when I was in New Zealand 2 years ago, I met a guy in South Island, and he had Highlanders, and we were talking about them. And again, the foundation of his herd was genetics from here. So um, the old man did something right along the way. So we were about 100, 250 cattle, 3 kids, 2 dogs, a full-time stockman as well. And that's on about 100 acres owned and 125 acres on a 10-year tenancy. And then we have a heap of summer grazing as well. As I said, originally pedigree Highlanders. We did go into Aberdeen Angus for a bit in the mid 80s. I was fairly judicious at culling them out of the herd over the last 10 years. They just don't fit our system here, or the ones that we had didn't. We are now predominantly Shorthorn and Highlanders, although we have now introduced Ling genetics. So more of the same, but different. Everything's outdoor wintered. We're pasture for life certified, so 100% grass forage fed. We are Scotch assured as well, and we're currently going through organic conversion. So tick lots of boxes. Our butcher's shop is Macbeth's in Forres, and that was bought in the mid 80s as a direct outlet for the farm. So for every pedigree Highlander you sell for good money, you've got about 10 unfancied things that then, as now, are not valued in the commercial marketplace. So parents decided they wanted to try and get some more margin for their beef, and so the butcher shop was bought. We're one of 3 butchers in the town, and within a 30-mile radius, there's probably another 15 butchers. So locally, it's very competitive. And that doesn't include farm shops and all these things. So we do a lot on mail order. It accounts for about 30% of our business. We've got a retail shop in Forres, but primarily what we do is food service. So hotels and restaurants, mainly on the West Coast. And we also do private processing for 25 other businesses, roughly. So people looking for their own route to market, so that's where we go with that. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, I guess it's to try and demonstrate that we put ourselves front and center in front of the consumer, in front of our customer, and we're speaking to them on a pretty daily basis, and especially when we're dealing with the likes of chefs who can be very demanding, as well as householders. We have to get it right, because there is nothing more frustrating than someone phoning you up and complaining about a bit of beef, and them saying that they've had to throw it in the bin. So, to our mind, what does the consumer want? I've lost my track. What slide are we on? Yeah, there we go. What does the consumer want? Or more accurately, what do they think they want? I think is probably a better way of looking at it. We are in a position where we have to listen to what they say. They give us a lot of feedback over the piece, but indeed our survival as a business is very dependent on giving the consumer what they want. And actually what they want is pretty clear. They would like a guilt-free eating experience. They have plenty of worries, either that they have naturally or that they're conditioned to. And it can be climate change, biodiversity loss, or it can be how can you eat a poor wee fluffy cow? Um, consumers increasingly worried about the medicines used, chemicals used in animal agriculture. Interestingly, though, not to the same extent as how much pesticides, herbicides are used in crop production. So they haven't quite made that link yet. But when they're talking to us, they are looking at things like natural foods. They're looking for something that is going to be of a health benefit from them. And there's some things that we can look at. So climate change is a very nuanced argument. We could go and say that they're wrong. Cows aren't causing climate change. But if I tell them that they're wrong, they're just going to go somewhere else. I could try and educate them, but frankly, I don't have the reach or the budget to do that. And so at the end of it, I really only have one choice, which is to give the consumer what they want. So that's led to us doing a number of different things on the farm over the years. We're certainly a lot more canny before firing up an engine of some description. We've stopped all recreational field rolling and harrowing. We don't use any fertilizer now, so we don't have to worry about the cost of it, which I think this year is going to be pretty critical again. And we certainly don't have to worry about the carbon that's embedded in that product. We're also trying to look at getting more out of grass lays, looking at longer term mixes and better management of them. But more than anything else, it's just trying to do less on the land and utilize it better. So this will be, I'm not going to go too much into this because this will be bread and butter to most people, but we started off with rotational grazing in 2018, having seen it at Rockmell Farm in Dunkeld, and then been talking to people about it, and we've sort of moved on to looking at taller residuals, longer rest periods. We've tried to increase diversity by adding sort of different herbs and things like that. I've not got many talents, but killing herbs is one of them. And I think where we are just, Inverness sort of direction is far enough north that we struggle with daylight length for too much of the year for a lot of these herbs to thrive. Certainly the herbs that you would buy seed out of a bag for. So I think we've got a bit of work to do there, but there's no two ways about it. I feel that we're more drought resilient. We're more resilient in extreme wet as well, and we're getting better grass growth, faster recovery, and we can use it slightly better. So we've also gone into a bit of deferred grazing and bale grazing. Again, that was more from a consumer perception point of view. There was one winter when I took a picture of our cattle grazing on stubble neeps, and the mud bath that was left behind. And I was taking a picture of it, and I was about to put it up on Instagram, and I just couldn't do it because the consumer wouldn't understand, and if they didn't understand, I felt that I'd already lost the argument. So we've gone down a deferred grass and bale grazing route now. That is a far happier place in the winter, both for the livestock and for the humans looking after them. And that's something that we'll carry on developing. And again, from the point of view of pleasing the consumer, we have, and ourselves, there's no two ways about it, We've gone down the route of looking at more habitat creation, how we boost the biodiversity on our farm. We have pretty much eliminated poor runs now. So, we're trying to look after our soil health better. And how we manage things like woodlands and hedgerows better. So we've actually got our first hedge laying course happening on Monday, which is very exciting. So we'll get stuck into that a wee bit. But all these things, it's a happier place for us to be. But when we bring our customers and consumers on the farm, they can see as well what we're trying to do for them. Morally, I think we take a subsidy from the government. I think it's beholden on us to do something with that over and above just producing food. I'm pretty addicted to carbon auditing. I think you can take the results with a certain amount of pinch of salt, but it does guide us in what we do. We've set a target to be net zero by 2030. It was 2028, but I keep pushing it on. It's just trying to get a handle on where we are, because again, if the consumer is concerned about these things, then we need to demonstrate that we are concerned about it on their behalf, and more importantly, trying to do something about it. There is nothing I can do about how much cows burp and fart. So I think it's for us, the responsibility there is trying to get a handle on where our stocking rate should be in relation to how much carbon we can sequester through our grasslands. And then I rely on tree plantations and hedgerows to sequester the carbon that we have from our direct emissions in burning diesel and so on and so forth, using electricity. So the last audit, I mean, we've audited since then but I haven't put the figures in, unfortunately, but this is an audit from 2023, I think it is, and we were down to 20 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of beef produced. That's based on the GWP 100 metric. If we use the GWP star metric, it would be a lot less. And there's maybe a discussion to be had in that at some point. So to try and meet consumer demands, what are we supplying? We are killing it between 500 and 600 kilos, 650 max. So a very modest sized animal. That's a dead weight of 250 to 300 kilos. Depending on the time of year, that can be anything from an R4L to an O3 in terms of the Europe grading. And the very best of our shorthorns, we would be getting away at 18 months old. The worst of our Highlands about 42 months old, and everything else is in between. We've actually taken out the Highland bulls now and replaced them with Ling, just to try and get a bit more speed on those tail enders, because those beasts that see a third winter are losing us money. And so whilst they may be nice to look at, it's not doing our business any favors. The reason for going to small animals is pretty clear for me. This is sirloin steaks off of two different types of carcass. The left-hand steak in the top picture there is typically what would be off of one of our beasts, and the one on the right is a more continental animal. The consumer these days would like an 8-ounce steak. Some would like a 10-ounce steak, but to be fair, 8-ounce is adequate for most people. To cook it properly, it needs to be at least an inch or an inch and a half thick. And I cannot do that off the carcass that's on the right-hand side. and that is probably more likely to be 750 kilos live weight. It is very difficult to cut a quality steak off of that. So that's one of the reasons for going for modest size of carcass. The other reason is that we no longer eat a Sunday roast, and yet we produce a significant number of animals in the marketplace that look like this. And if you see this bit, this is the shoulders. I can sell that all day long. For me, that goes into high quality mince and good quality burgers, diced as well. That sells itself. That's your sirloins and fillets, and into your rib roast as well. The biggest issue I have is with this bit. The amount of time, money, genetics, effort we have put into creating animals with huge backsides to produce a roast that we can't actually sell is incredible to me. So again, the size and the shape of the beast is really, really important to have a really efficient throughput of carcasses. So we generally put beasts to the slaughterhouse on the basis of topside and silverside demand. So if that's the slowest thing to sell, I don't want to be selecting genetics that produces a huge amount of it. And yet that's still what gets rewarded in the marketplace. So all of this is all well and good. We are farming, I think, in the right way. We're doing the right things. But what happens if the customer doesn't actually like what we do when it hits the plate? And this is what's happened for us. I believe that we've been doing everything right, and yet we've not been getting the right result. Too often, steaks were hitting the plates and falling short in expectations, both the consumers and mine. And I've not been able to understand it. I feel that I've been doing everything that I should be doing. I've been told is the right thing, what the consumer wants us to do, but the product at the end of the day hasn't been what it should be. And out of this came my Nuffield topic, which was enhanced meat eating quality from 100% grass and forage fed beef. And I went into the topic with the preconception that 100% grass fed beef should be the best that you can buy. But I guess before we go into it, we probably need to understand by what we mean by best. Meat eating quality will mean different things to different people. And traditionally, we think of it in terms of its intrinsic values of tenderness, flavour, succulence, and increasingly nutrient density. However, consumer now adds other more extrinsic values as well. And I'm sorry, that hasn't really come up on the slide very well. But it's looking at things like grass-fed versus grain-fed, outdoor reared, indoor reared, native, continental, organic, conventional, and so it goes on. And I guess it was really started by Marks and Spencer's when they started with this isn't just steak, this is 30-day dry-aged Aberdeen Angus steak, and you start layering on quality values to a bit of beef. There is one factor, though, that trumps all others, and that's availability. Sadly, and all too frequently, we have members of society, domestically and globally, to whom the consumption of beef is simply out of reach. And my Nuffield, and actually for a lot of us in this industry, we take for granted the privilege that we have in being able to buy and eat beef, but for too many, it's just not an option. That all said, we are in a developed world, and our industry now competes on a global stage, and we're competing against people who arguably play this game far better than us. We're also at a time when beef is at a pretty high price, albeit that it's been coming back recently. But the consumer, when they're paying a lot for something, expects and demand better outcomes from what they buy. And if they don't get it, they will go and look elsewhere. That might be beef from a different production system, a different country, or it might even be a different protein altogether. What's As I was traveling around, so I went to places such as America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Chile, Brazil, and Uruguay. And a lot of it was to look at production methods, but a lot of it was our competitors. I wanted to go and see what they were doing and how it was going to affect our home market. What I hadn't expected when I was traveling around was the extent to which what constitutes good quality varies. Generalizing in the US, they prize tenderness above all things. And indeed, in many countries, grain finished will be rewarded more than grass fed. And that's when my preconception of grass fed being the best was just blown out of the water, because it's not. It's not considered the best, far from it. The concept of 100% grass fed is largely to fit a privileged, predominantly European ideal. But for a lot of people, it's too gamey, it has too much bite, and is too inconsistent. And repeatedly in my travels, consistency came up as being of vital importance. But consistently, what? Are we talking about something that's consistently good, consistently tender, or consistently flavoursome? Or are we talking about something that's consistently mediocre or tough or consistently bland? When we talk about consistency, we need to understand what we're consistently trying to achieve. One of the things with most conventional production is that the use of concentrate feeds is a great leveler. It takes out a lot of the inconsistencies, but we see a lot more inconsistency in this pasture-fed beef, and I think we then need to look at principles as to how we get consistently good meat eating quality outcomes for this. So one of the first things we looked at was compensatory growth. And compensatory growth is not always our friend. Too often, when growing cattle in 100% grass and forage systems, we accept a low to non-existent growth rate over winter with the expectation that the compensatory growth the following spring and summer will make up the weight gain. And, you know, that's a well-peddled technique in the industry to bring on cattle, that we can take cattle through winter, and then we'll make it up during the summer. And so these are some of the growth profiles that we can get. And if we look at the light blue line there, that's maybe something that you'd get off a bull beef program, where it's consistent nutrition over the piece to hit a weight, and that will produce a certain product. And then as we go further to the right of the graph, we can then start looking at the effects of maybe taking out some of that concentrate feed and that controlled nutrition to one that is more forage based, more natural, but with the consequence of that being more variable in quality. One of the things that if you have too significant a check is that you might never ever make up the full weight, mature weight that animal can achieve. It will always be slightly stunted. The other thing that I would, one of the reasons this is important, sorry, is that if we get to a place where a young animal, which doesn't have the fat reserves that a more mature animal has, there's a danger that the animal will start to catabolize muscle to release energy. And we can see that in the far right-hand curve here, where there's in that 200 to 400 day first winter, it's actually lost weight. And that muscle will be turning into gristle, and there will also be a premature aging of the animal. So we increase the amount of ossification, the amount of connective tissue, and the outcome that we get is pretty chewy and unappealing. So which doesn't land well with the customer. Um, this is data from our own one of our own animals, and there's a slight variability in the weigh crate, but what I was trying to show with this is that if we have a negative or a static growth rate in the first winter, that will nearly always carry through every subsequent winter. I think there's an epigenetic effect there, so that we're switching on signals to the animal that it needs to conserve energy. It's going to control the amount of intake that it's going to get, even if it's in front of it. And that will repeat every single winter. Now, that's great in a suckler cow, but it's not great in an animal that you're going to finish and eat. So I'd argue that compensatory growth is an economic argument rather than an argument to achieve good meat eating quality. The other factor I came across, and this was from Australia, is the glycogen bucket. And I find this really useful now in thinking about how we manage our animals. And basically, the premise is that prior to slaughter, we're looking to try and increase the amount of muscle glycogen in the animal as much as possible. Muscle glycogen is important because it converts to lactic acid, which in turn helps control pH in the muscle post-mortem. And getting pH in the right range is really important to reduce either dark and tough meat at one end or really floppy exudative meat at the other end. So getting pH is a really critical factor. Muscle glycogen depletes with stress, so that can be nutritional stress, handling stress, transport stress. So that's really important pre-slaughter that those are minimized, but it's always going to happen. So trying to maximize muscle glycogen is vital, and that's done with nutrition. So it's over winter and early spring, when forage quality is pretty poor. That's hard to achieve. But as you get into the summer and into the autumn, there's potential to lift that muscle glycogen with greater consistency and to sustained higher levels. We then need to recognize that this brings a seasonality to grass-fed beef, not experienced in the same grain finished animals. And then the third thing which I sort of came across is really this breeding and feeding for eating quality, to try and balance flavor and tenderness. We do have a trade-off to play. Generally, the older the animal is at slaughter, the profile of the beef goes from tender and more subtle flavor to one with more flavor but more bite. And it might also include more connective tissue and gristle. As his potential for adverse growth effects increases over time. But more than anything, this is, I think, one of the most important vectors to address. This is a slide that I don't often bring out, but I maybe should do in more often, and especially when we're looking at grass-based systems. I think it's important. So this is data from the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, and it's AI bulls put over dairy heifers. The progeny are finished and then taste tested. And they've been doing this for a number of years now and really building up data. This is their 23 data. I actually just found their 2025 data last night, so I need to update this. But everything's been taste tested on the basis of juiciness, tenderness, and flavor. and then have aggregated the scores and ranked by breed. And what we see is pretty clear. Dairy beef does extremely well. Native beef does really well. And then we get into some of our continental cattle, and they do less well. There's obviously a whole heap of breeds missing out of this, but I've basically tried to just include the breeds that are statistically significant in this. So anything under 100 progeny records, I've just taken out. So what's at the bottom is maybe surprising, it's maybe not. What's at the top is maybe surprising, it's maybe not. But it does show, in my mind, that breed matters. The other thing is, I would say this is not on a PFLA system. So this will have a certain amount of grass concentrate feed for finishing. And as I said, that grain is a great leveler. So if we imagine these breeds on a grass-based system, how those figures would look. So very quickly, opportunities. All this is well and good what I've said, but how do we make the most of it? At the moment, we in the industry we reward for size and shape, so that's what we produce. We need to start measuring and rewarding for eating quality. If we look at our competitors, nearly all of them have some way of measuring quality. We are one of the few countries that profess to have quality beef that don't measure it. And then we also need to establish a failure rate. Now, whether this is as an individual business or whether it is as a production group, say the PFLA had a supply chain, what constitutes good, what needs to come out the system. Same with Scotch, same with Red Tractor. I think we need to be starting to look at a failure rate for that. The other thing is we need to get better at telling our story. This is one of the packets that I picked up in New Zealand, and to me, it's a masterclass as to how you promote your product. This is Silver Fern Farms beef fillet, clear country of origin, customer assurance in terms of serving quantity. It has an environmental reassurance, quality indicators, and it's certified net zero. On the back, it goes into the story about how they're farming for nature. Again, a bit more about the expectations of eating quality, nutritional info, environmental information, and all these good things. It alleviates much of the guilt that a consumer would have about buying the product. And in fact, the consumer might actually feel quite good about buying this product. I put this on social media and said, what about it? Shouldn't we be doing the same thing? And I got lambasted because everybody said, well, it's got carbon data on it, doesn't mean anything. The consumer doesn't understand it, doesn't care. And then I said, well, what happens if we put it on the shelves in a supermarket next to our product when our product looks like this? This does nothing for the consumer. So I would argue that one of the biggest threats that we have in our industry is not the competition, but that we take consumer for granted and assume that just because we think that we're doing everything right, it will automatically sell when we don't actually test how our product stacks up against the competition. And that could be on a supermarket shelf, or it could be a grass-fed animal compared to a grain-fed animal. What are we doing? We're adapting a breeding program, trying to shorten days to slaughter. For me, this 200 to 400 day management is really key, and we're trying to get that slightly better, looking at getting growth rates more consistent, and what have you. And then lastly, looking at data collection and analysis. So I think it is key on farm that we collect data to make decisions. The most obvious one is regular weight data, not too regular, but regular enough that you can get a picture of what's going on, and that allows you to make the decisions. So, in conclusion, I think what's important is that we need to recognize that just because we want something to be true, it doesn't necessarily make it so. In terms of what we're producing, size matters, growth rates matter, the breed selection matters, and how we present the product matters. Storytelling is absolutely vital, but we need to have a product that eats well and backs up that story. I was going to talk a bit about Farmstrong, but I think I'm going to cap it there, Jamie, if that sounds all right, because we've only really got 15 minutes left.
Yeah,
I've whittled on quite a bit.
not at all. Do you want to take some questions just now then, Jock?
Yeah, let's do that.
Sure. So, Hugh, are you happy for me to read out your question, or do you want to come in and ask it yourself? That's fine. I'll read it out for you. Um, which of the grading systems from around the world do you think is best?
Australia's without a shadow of a doubt. I think a lot of grading systems grade by marbling score as a proxy for eating quality. And what you see is demonstrated in America and potentially Japan to that effect with the Wagyu beef, is that you produce a highly marbled product using a very intensive diet that is then finished quite quickly. And what you produce is a really bland, floppy product. Nutritionally pretty light, especially in America, given the way that they farm. It's a pretty intensive, chemically dependent system. There's not much in their soils, not much nutrition there. The Australian system it'll look at breed, it'll look at finishing technique, it'll look at, not so relevant in this country, but hump height. So that's the difference with the influence of Brahman cattle with the hump on them. So difference between Bos Taurus and Bos Indicus. But it also look at grass-fed, grain-fed, sex, and all of that. What it'll then do is put that into an algorithm and break down eating quality, not only per carcass, but also by individual cut. So that potentially enables you to release more value out of a carcass. A beef fillet will pretty much always eat quite well, whether it's from a 7-year-old dairy cow to a 12-month-old bull beef to a 24-month heifer. The difference won't be huge, whereas the difference in, say, shoulder steak really would be. So we're maybe not getting as much value out of certain cuts at the moment because we don't pay as much for cow beef or bull beef, but we could still get the value out of those individual cuts. That information is also fed back to the consumer. So to the producer. So as a producer in Australia, you will get your kill sheets. So you'll get your payment for your weight, but you'll also get a pH indicator back. And I think pH is one of the most important factors that we could be testing for, because as a producer, it allows you to assess whether what you're doing on farm and in the transport to the slaughterhouse is right. You can't tell if the slaughterhouse is causing a problem, but it enables you to get quite a lot in place to make sure that you're doing right to get that good quality outcome.
Yeah, perfect. Grant. Hope that answers your question, Hugh. It definitely answered the question for me. I've got another question here from Sam. I'll just read it out, Sam, unless you want to come in and add anything on afterwards. Oh, no. On you go, Sam.
Oh, no. Hi, Jock.
Hi,
Thank you very
Sam.
much for that. I'm sorry I was late to that. Question, I suppose you obviously sell your own meat,
Hmm.
and I really like those labels that you've shown us with whether it's carbon uh, neutral or whatever. Are you planning to label any of your own produce?
Yeah, it's something that we're looking at as to how we communicate that with the consumer. I mean, we're in a slightly more difficult position to the likes of yourself, Sam, because you guys will only sell what you're producing. So you've got a much easier way of doing that in that you know whatever's coming through your premises, you can label with the claims that you want to make, and you can back up. Um, because we're handling our own carcasses plus other people's carcasses that we're buying and then selling on, it's more difficult for us to do that in a way that I can absolutely guarantee the integrity of what we're doing. It would be too easy for an employee to go, oh well, we've got this information, we'll slap it on that carcass, and it's not right. And I'm always quite clear that we don't only sell our own produce, we are buying and selling from other people. But then that maybe limits me in some of the claims that I make because it starts to muddy the waters. Um, so, but it is something that we're looking at. Put it this way: I'm not changing the way that we farm to not then communicate that to the consumer.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I just wondered, given what you've seen and ignoring the complications of having other people's beasts in there, almost for your own, from your own perspective, would you? I'd be quite keen to do something, even if people don't understand what it is yet. We use economic nutrition as a measurement. No one knows what it means. But even if we were using something like eating quality, as long as it's endorsed by somebody who's recognized, where would you use as
So
your?
for the likes of eating quality, there is nothing in the UK that is going to it is going to work. There's just nothing here. And the other thing is if you're going to do it, it needs to be in comparison to something else. So we almost need the whole industry to be measuring for eating quality because it's a comparison. You know, this is going to be more flavoursome than that, or this breed is more flavoursome than that, or this cut is more tender than that. And if you're the only one with that eating quality claim, it's a sort of so what sort of situation. The other thing is and I haven't talked about it, but we can condition the customer and the consumer to what they like. But it is one of the worries that I have with the increased prevalence of ultra processed foods. More and more, we're conditioning consumers to eating fairly bland, soft food. And I suspect what the likes of you and I produce is it's certainly not bland, and it maybe has a little bit more bite than something that's more intensively produced and finished. We've got customers that like that, so long as it's not too bitey, not too tough. They like the flavor, they like the texture. We've conditioned the consumer to that, but it's going to be harder and harder if the vast majority of the population go down the line of this, something similar to ultra processed food.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed. Thank you.
I don't know if that really gets you any further forward or not, Sam.
Thanks for that, Sam. That was a good wee discussion. I'll come back to your second question, Sam, but I'll just take this one from Serena just now. Serena, would you like to come in and ask? Are you happy with me to do it for you?
Um, Well, you do it. It's fine.
Okay. Just to say, do you ever sell cow or bull beef, or only that from young animals?
No, we only sell from younger animals. We will put cow beef away for we'll put it away into the cull market. Bull beef, we just don't touch it. We've maybe had the odd stirk that we've not been able to castrate. A lot of our genetics comes from a farm where they're famous for bulls with one bull. So so we can't always castrate. If they're on the same system, grass-based system, so we put them through the shop sometimes and they're fine. The challenge is this consistency piece. Customer wants to come into the shop and within reason get the same thing that they got the last time. We will, we're looking at lamb or mutton, for example, we will take in muttons, which is appreciably different from lamb or hogget, but it's a small carcass, relatively speaking, and we can get a market for all of that. I haven't got a market to deal with a whole carcass of cow beef, but I think there is an untapped potential in there. Do not knock 7-year-old Jersey cow until you've tried it. It is absolutely delicious, but it has textural challenges to it. It is not to everybody's taste. It is a very different product. And so when we're looking at these things, I think we need to recognize that it's a different product, that it has massive potential, but we need to market it as such.
Thanks, Jock. I've always been too scared to try to market a cow. But I gather that in some countries, like is it Spain or Portugal or something, that cow beef is very much favoured, and maybe we are missing an opportunity.
Yeah, continental Europe largely is cow beef is pretty sought after in many ways. I think as well that is slightly to do with the genetics that they're using. So again, it's much more continental breeds, tends to be softer muscle, easier to chew, albeit they don't mature over there. They don't mature their beef at all. So, in this country, what we've conditioned the consumer, again, it's this conditioning consumer. We've told the consumer that prime beef, quality beef, comes from something that's between 12 months old and 48 months old. That's what we've told them is prime Scotch beef. Says who? Where's the data that backs that up? Who's to say that we aren't missing out on huge potential from cow beef market, for example. If I go to sheep meat, I find it a lot easier to sell, and I get a lot better feedback from hogget rather than prime lamb. We will get much better consumer engagement with that than we do with lamb. Part of it is in the name, but part of it is that maybe lamb doesn't have as much to it. Certainly younger springborn lamb doesn't have as much to it that the consumer's looking for, but that's what we've told them is a quality product.
Mm-hmm. It strikes me that there's quite a number of Nuffield scholarships to be had out of this subject.
Yeah, and we could. There's so much still to look at. I think where we're missing out on is the data for the next step, because we're simply not collecting it. If we could start feeding back even pH, and most slaughterhouses now will measure pH, but if we could start feeding that back to the primary producer and start linking that to farming practice, to breeds, to even geographical location, and so on and so forth, then what can we then start to do as an industry? But I think one of the things that I think concerns me is just that lack of consistency across farms within the industry, as to the produce that we come out with.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Serena. Just one final question here from Sam. Consistency through the seasons. We struggle to finish from grass from October to March due to age of animal and nutrition. Do you think grass fed is seasonal in the UK?
Yeah, I do. I don't know how we, where we've got to is I try and get as many animals to the point of finishing or near finishing as I can by October, certainly by November, and then I almost have to hold them, and that's not cool. It doesn't lead to a fantastic outcome, but and even when can we start finishing? Really from June onwards here, May, June onwards, to get an animal back onto really good tucker and moving on that, and finishing. I also think we need to have a bit more research into playing with the state of our grasses and how we finish them. Whether we're looking for young grass to put very rich in protein to grow a carcass on, or whether we're looking for something that's a bit more energy rich that will put on a bit of fat to finish the animal. So what stage is the grass at?
So, I mean, by the sound of it, you've got the same conclusion we've got. We just can't get the energy and the protein up, even in our silage for the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Or probably we could do if we were finishing at 36 months, but we're not wanting to put OTM into the butchery for all the economic reasons that everybody knows about.
Although it shouldn't be OTM anymore.
Well, there shouldn't be.
Your slaughterhouse still burning them out over 30 months?
They are at the moment. But
I would tell them to stop it.
And
OTM rules have been lifted.
Yeah, well, I was rather hoping we were going to end up with nothing, but do we, well, from that basis, then is PFLA or pasture-fed beef would then no longer be seasonal if you can take them to older ages. We've always been stuck with this problem that they're going to hit 30 months before they're really fat because they hit that period at the wrong time of year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's kind of why we're sort of tweaking with our breeds slightly, to try and get that finishing right. I mean, I've got two constraints here, is that I need quite a few animals for a Christmas kill, and I ideally don't want to be doing the bulk of my kill with nearly 30-month animals, because of the economics of that. But it's how we get round that seasonality of it. And if we think about it, there's always been a seasonality. If we go right back to preserving meats, preserving foods, that was always done in the autumn. That was when larders were filled and what have you, because you couldn't finish an animal during the winter, or you didn't want to. So I think there's a bit that we can do with grass mixes to a certain extent, to try and boost at the shoulders, but it's marginal.
And is blast freezing something that should be considered?
Do you know what? We have this real hang up in this country about blast freezing stuff, and I don't know why. You go to any other country and they will quite often buy out of freezers.
Just that if, but it's very difficult for PFLA to build a brand on a product that's not available all year unless it can build a seasonal brand.
Hmm.
Can I possibly just chip in? I mean, surely it depends where you are. Is it not geographic, though? I mean, obviously, Jock, being as far north as he is going to have more problems than someone in England, no?
Yes, and don't forget where PFLA really came out of was the south of England.
Mm. Yes.
Which is it's a bit of a different kettle of fish. I think we forget how much of an influence daylight length has on our
Exactly.
production system. And if it weren't for the Gulf Stream, our production system in this country would be very, very different. But we are where we are, and we've got to try and get the most out of it. We're certainly trying to play with different mixes to improve our winter forage quality, because I think that's our next opportunity, but it's not going to solve all the problems.
Mm. I think that there is an awful lot more to the genetics of the animal as well. I mean, I've always said this. I can only speak about one breed, which is a traditional Hereford, and that's what we are. Totally different genetically from the modern Hereford, which came from America. And when we started, we talked to an old breeder who'd been breeding for donkey's years and selling beef. And he said that because of the changes in the 1980s and medical opinion, he got rid of all his cattle that ran to fat. And therefore, if most people did this in order to try and produce lean carcasses, then you're producing a different animal from the type that was around 50 years ago. And I just think that, the genetics of the animal must play a huge part in how well it utilizes the grass. And so much we don't know. So, it's great that you did this work, but there's so much more needing done.
One of the real things that I struggled with was the amount of, when I was going and speaking to people, was the amount of data that wasn't being collected.
Yeah.
So everybody was doing stuff from gut feel and eyeballing animals without actually having the data in front of them.
And it's the same in other countries as well.
No, I would say here there's almost a pride in some circles where they don't weigh an animal. And I slightly struggle with that because, and it came home to me when was it 2 winters ago, we had an exercise where I wanted to late wean calves just to see what happened. And I was looking at these calves thinking, oh, they look amazing. They're doing really well. And I weaned them in December, normally wean in October. But it was January I weaned them in the end. And brought them in thinking, oh, these look amazing. And they'd done nothing weight-wise. Yet to my eye, they looked brilliant. And so there's huge proponents in the industry, vocal proponents in the industry that say that we should be out wintering all our livestock, all classes, all year round. They'll do amazing. Don't they look brilliant? But you put them over a weigh scale and it's a different story. And weigh scales generally don't lie. And if we are getting that suboptimal growth, so anything below, certainly 0.4, but ideally anything below 0.6, it's going to compromise the product that we produce at the end of the day.
And you've found that yourself, have you? Or is
Yeah.
that just what you've read? You've found it. And that's a very, very interesting and very important point for all of us who are PFLA, I think, is how to keep animals growing. And certainly, we've had issues with that too, I think, inevitably.
And I
But
think,
can I just say the one do you think that when you wean the calves may make a difference? Because we don't wean ours till March.
yeah, so for us here, we are an early calving system. So we start calving 1st of March. And part of that reason is to hit that winter kill the
Yes.
following year.
Yeah.
And I need 12 months of the year supply. So, and a bit like Sam, didn't want anything going over 30 months. So if over 30 months is the upper limit, the lower limit is 18 months. And if I'm at March calving, then I can get stuff in for a Christmas kill at 18, 19 months old. And that starts the clock, because we know that however many winters we are holding animals for, the less profitable they will be. And, first and foremost, we've got to make a profit. Yeah.
I see.
But yeah, I think, that all those things with, where we are introducing checks to an animal's performance has an impact on the end product. And there's some things that we can mitigate, but once an animal's developed gristle, for example, that gristle never leaves. And I see that Sam's asked about 200 to 400 days. Yeah, I think we need to be trying to get to at least 0.6 of a kilo a day.
I think the reason I was asking it, Jock, actually is because that we really are struggling with that in the winter in their first year.
Yeah.
And we're trying all sorts of different ways of getting anywhere near that. I'm pretty sure genetics have got a lot to do with it and breed, but we will be struggling to get above 0.3 on average, which I'm very disappointed with. We were doing more when we had cross cows, and now we're native breed only. We're really struggling with that.
Can I ask what breed you have, Sam?
Lincoln Red.
Ah, right.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
I do wonder with our wintering systems, and I need somebody who can explain genetics and epigenetics better to me. But if we are out wintering our cows, and they have this calf in utero, and we are expecting a certain amount of condition loss, expecting or accepting a certain amount of condition loss on our cows during the winter, is there an epigenetic effect on the calf in utero that says it is also going to lose condition during the winter? And therefore, do we need to be kinder to our cows during the winter so that we don't have that effect on the offspring, if that makes sense? The other thing is, I think for our calves to successfully winter, they need to be a certain percentage of mature size. So for calves to successfully outwinter, I think they need to be at least 60% of mature body weight by their first winter. And I think that's virtually impossible to do. And I think even if they're inside, they need to be 50% of their mature body weight. And that's pretty difficult to achieve. As a calving at the beginning of March, we might just about get there with some of our better calves. And certainly the ones that go into the winter heavier, into that 200 days, correspondingly perform better by the time they've got to 400 days.
That's quite a challenge, isn't it, to get everything singing at that level? Because we're certainly not weaning at 50%.
No.
And we are gaining very little in their first winter, and I think we're gaining from compensatory growth in their second summer. And that affects the quality of the meat, by the sound of it.
But are you seeing a negative effect on the quality of your meat in your mind?
I mean, no, I'm not. We're definitely. But could the product be better? Because I don't think we're so far from achieving this 0.6 per kilo, steady growth, and we used to do that with our cereal-based system. That's what we were looking for, and so we were always aiming for this steady growth, and I thought we had it. And as the shift in breeding has come through, that's gradually deteriorated to half of that. But has that affected the meat eating quality? In a way, that's why I can't really tell. Yeah, it'd be nice
Yeah.
to know. Otherwise, it's anecdotal, isn't it? Either way.
And that's the thing. Everything that we talk about in this is really anecdotal because we don't have the data. We can't say that this particular carcass achieved a certain eating quality outcome. And for me, I mean, you're dealing with one breed. I'm dealing with, well, 3, maybe even possibly 4 breeds within our genetic makeup. And so we've got a variability there and an inconsistency there that I'm not massively comfortable with.
Yeah, I think yeah, in that situation, there are lots of other variables, aren't there?
Mm-hmm. But I do think this steady growth has a negative impact. Well, a lack of steady growth has a negative impact on particularly the bite experienced when you're eating. Now, the other thing is some of that will be taken out with good maturation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't really talked much about that. About, do you mean hanging?
Yeah, with dry aging.
So what is your opinion on what's the best time for aging?
So Australia has research that says there's no material effect after 10 days of maturation.
Really?
Yeah. And they have the data and one has to believe that. I personally think it very much depends on which part of the animal you're looking at. I think there's a huge amount to be gained in terms of product quality if you're hanging tops for at least 30 days. Similarly, roasts as well. But certainly anything over 21 days, I would say it becomes less of a quality thing and more of a marketing thing.
Yeah.
We hang for 30 days. We used to hang for 21 days with good effect. I think more important than length after 21 days is how good your maturation is, how good your facilities are. If you've got good fridges with humidity control and things like that, I think that is more important than just down to the length that you give it.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Brilliant. It's almost like a sort of PFL expert deep dive at the very end of this webinar, which is fantastic.
Yeah, but I think, Jamie, if you're looking at a supply chain thing for PFL, it's one that actually it needs to get nailed. I mean, one of the guys that I spoke to was what was the guy that had the abattoir that went bust?
Duff.
Yeah, Andrew Duff. And because he would have seen most of the PFL carcasses that were being produced just because of the way his business was run and things like that. And he would say the variation was absolutely wild.
Yep. I think in the end, that was almost what did him under in some cases, was this huge variation, and the carcass balance couldn't be forecasted and all this. So
yeah, and we can say all these lovely things about isn't what we're doing wonderful and great and brilliant, but it's got to be commercial at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if that level of inconsistency is not commercial.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it? I could talk about this all day.
We don't have all day. Well, one of the things that we're trying to do with Pasture for Life is we're trying to work with. I'm going to get is it SAOS? We're trying to work with them to do some supply chain stuff, And we had a small meeting at Johnny Balfour's about 2 months ago with a few Passive Life certified producers, and we're talking about one of the first things we'd start doing is actually pulling some data amongst all these certified herds to actually establish, the spectrum of finishing times, weight, quality, all these kind of things to actually understand what it is we are producing and when. Because I think the first thing in even to establish a couple of different specs for pasture-fed meat, we have to have a handle on all this. With all the wide variety of genetics that we use and systems and all this
Well, I
kind
think the principle of why I think it's a seasonal product is because it has a market advantage over, or it's significantly better than its competition at the right time of year, and it's no better than its competition at the wrong time of year. And I think it would be quite damaging to try and oversell it as something that's available 365 days a year at scale. Yeah, we can finish any number of them between May and August, September, no problem at all. But we'll be dry for the rest of the month, and that's really hard to get shelf space and value add
of.
unless you blast freeze it or sell it seasonally. New season lamb, new season beef.
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely think there's something to be done there in terms of the seasonality. Because I mean, they do it for, in my opinion anyway, we do it for lamb. Why couldn't we do it for beef? But yeah, so long story short, there's a lot of work to be done. We are trying to move forward with it this year, and hopefully we'll have a bit more to share.
And if you want one final question to be asked, Jock, this one's probably you'll be able to answer this. The critical 200 to 400 days. What's more critical, the steady growth increase, weight increase and growth of carcass, or no supplementary feeding of cereals in flavour? I'm only talking in eating quality.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people would say that flavour is a proxy for nutrient density. So I think if you're putting in grains, for example, it's what's the nutrient content of that feed stuff. I would also go back to if your animals are eating a ryegrass that's headed, or they're eating a barley plant, what's the difference? So I think it's like all these things. It's not so much whether grain good or grain bad. It's what is that grain. And I think there's growing evidence that some of whether it's grains, grasses, fruit plants, we're breeding for bigger, faster, but that is maybe in opposition to nutrient content, which is maybe linked to flavour.
Fair enough.
That's very interesting.
More research required.
And diplomatic.
Very diplomatic.
But I think you're right, Sam. We can get stuck in our boxes and go, "This is bad, that's good." And I think we may say we don't want to feed grain because of X, Y, and Z. That's great, but we need to understand what that grain in the diet actually does.
Yeah, I had Trevor Cook here last year, and Trevor was an advocate for feeding all calves half a kilo per head a day of barley, only to feed the gut bacteria.
Yeah.
Any more than that, he said, was a complete waste of time. But it would turbocharge the gut bacteria and enable them to actually digest the forage we were feeding them better. And that's when I started thinking, are we standing on a sort of religious parapet, or are we producing the best quality beef?
But hang on, are you sure that the gut microbiome is the same? I don't think it is. I think that if you start feeding them barley, you're going to condition the gut to cope better with barley and not with grass. I'm not sure I believe that.
I don't know the answer to that. What I know is that we're not getting the growth rates as we are.
Mm-hmm.
And if eating quality is a direct correlation to growth rate, then we're already at a disadvantage. And what I would, if you could do this, I would love to run a trial on the
Yes.
two side by side,
Yeah.
because I don't think it matters whether it's a sniff of barley or whether it's but
Hmm.
at what point does it make any difference? But if the end result is that that animal enters its second summer
Hmm.
heavier and is finishing at a consistent rate, and that improves the eating quality, regardless of whether this is pasture for life or not. If what we're talking about is eating quality, then that's the research I think we probably need to
Hmm.
understand.
Mm.
The other
So,
thing with
so, so, Jock, have you come out of this feeling that you don't want to be pasture for life anymore?
no, because I think being pasture for life gives me a competitive edge. It gives me something that is a point of difference. Um, but I think it I don't think it is recognized within, frankly, I don't think it's recognized within pasture for life, or the standards as to just how difficult it is to finish pasture for life in our latitude. Um, and we are one of the most northerly producers.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
um, and so it is difficult. It is a different kettle of fish to what happens further down the country. Um, I think we need to have better research as to how we get through that 200 to 400 day period, because I think the other thing that we don't consider is the amount of energy that's required in this system, or how much energy is wasted. If you've got a calf that is static at best going through winter, or worse, going backwards, the amount of energy you need to put into that animal to then turn that growth profile around is huge, which you just simply don't need if that animal is consistently gaining weight all the time.
Mm.
So we need to have the research which says, if we're going to stick to a pasture for life system, what do we need to be putting into that animal that it can digest, to deliver the energy and protein that it requires? Because it's all very well saying, we have this silage or whatever, this feed stuff that's high in energy, high in protein, but digestibility is crap.
Hmm.
That animal's just not going to be able to use it.
Yeah.
How do we go into this, with that? And I do think there is a piece in, what do we a lot of pasture for life systems would be very much based on, what can we make a suckler cow do? The beef is the byproduct from that. It's a lot
Yes.
of, low cost, low input suckler cows. But what is the impact on that on the offspring, and what does that do for the growth of an animal?
Hmm.
I mean, Sam, when you had your continentals, were your cows inside over the winter, or were they out?
Some and some. The lings were out all winter, and the simlings were in.
And the calves from the simlings
All
they were
all
easy.
calves were in.
Yeah.
Everything was bought in, and fat cattle were bought in. Basically, we had an indoor system in all intents and purposes. And this last couple of years, we've run a hybrid with half in and half out to run comparisons of different ages. So cows are all out, but the young stock are half in, half out for the whole winter. And we set out with the SAC to do a nutritional diet analysis the opposite way around, to say, well, this is the feed they've got. What growth rate will we expect from them, rather than this is what we expect from them, and therefore formulate a feed. So we went arse about with it, and every year we hover around the expected growth rate of zero point 0.6 of a kilo per head per day based on the forage we're feeding them, and we're not getting it. And
Yeah.
in any other system, you'd be questioning the feed.
But unless you're going to question genetics.
possibly genetics as well. I mean, we've still got some crosses in the system that are working their way through, and they are slightly better, but they're still not performing. We're not getting anywhere near that rate. And when we come to the end of their first winter in the shed and they're being turned out and they're not even 50% of their mature weight, that's a problem.
Yeah.
This is all absolutely fascinating, folks, but we're half an hour over. So I'm gonna call it quits there. I really appreciate
Okay.
the contributions though, and just want to say, as someone who works for Pasture for Life, I couldn't agree more that we need to answer some of these questions. Because if anyone needs to know, Pasture for Life do.
Yeah.
So right,
Thank you very much. It was brilliant.
Thank you very
great.
much. Good to
Thanks
speak.
very much, folks.
Cheers, Jock.
Okay.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.